In 1961, two men stood on a stage in Belgrade and did something the Cold War said was impossible. They refused to choose. Not the United States, not the Soviet Union, neither. One was Sukarno, leader of the world's largest archipelago, 80 million people sitting on the most contested trade routes on Earth. The other was Tito, the man who had already done the unthinkable in 1948 when he broke with Stalin and survived. Together with Nasser and Nehru beside them, they built something the two superpowers had spent a decade trying to prevent. A third bloc, a movement of nations that belonged to no one. They called it non-alignment. The world called it suicide, because in 1961, neutrality wasn't a position. It was a target. Washington saw it as communism in disguise. Moscow saw it as a betrayal in waiting. Every newly independent country that had tried to stand between the two giants had been pulled apart, propped up, or quietly overthrown. Sukarno and Tito weren't trying to opt out of the Cold War. They were trying to weaponize it. The strategy was simple to describe and almost impossible to execute. If you refuse to pick a side, both sides have to compete for you. Aid from Washington, weapons from Moscow, legitimacy from both. The tension between the superpowers wasn't a danger to be avoided. It was the resource to be mined. Tito had already proven it could work. After 1948, Yugoslavia should have been crushed. It wasn't. He took American money. He kept Soviet ideology. He built a country that survived inside a gap that wasn't supposed to exist. Sukarno saw it and copied it at scale. By the early 1960s, Indonesia was receiving Soviet bombers and American economic assistance at the same time. Khrushchev courted him personally. Bandung in 1955 had already gathered 29 newly independent nations under his roof. Belgrade in 1961 formalized it. For a brief moment, it worked. Two men, two countries on opposite ends of the world, holding the entire Cold War in tension between them. But here is what most people miss. Non-alignment wasn't a position you could hold. It was a position you had to keep balancing. Every day, every crisis, every shift in the wind. The moment the tension broke, the game ended. Inside Indonesia, the pressure was already building. Sukarno played the same game at home that he played abroad, balancing the army against the communists the way he balanced Washington against Moscow. The Indonesian Communist Party had grown into one of the largest in the non-Soviet world. The military watched it grow and waited. Tito faced a different version of the same problem. The fractures inside Yugoslavia were held together by his personal authority alone. The balance wasn't structural. It was him. Both men had built their power on the same foundation, borrowed tension. In 1965, the foundation cracked in Indonesia. A coup attempt, still debated by historians, triggered a military counter-coup. General Suharto seized control. Hundreds of thousands were killed in the months that followed. Sukarno was placed under house arrest. He died there in 1970, politically erased. Tito lasted longer. He held Yugoslavia together until his death in 1980. The country he built didn't survive the decade after him. Two leaders, two collapses, same mechanism. The strategy had worked exactly as designed. They extracted resources from rivals who should have ignored them. They built leverage from nothing. The non-aligned movement still exists today, with over 100 member states. But the strategy had no stable ending. When you depend on the tension between two giants to stay relevant, you don't have power. You have a position, and positions hold only as long as the giants stay roughly equal. The moment one tilts or one collapses, the ground beneath you disappears. The Soviet Union fell in 1991. The Cold War ended, and the entire architecture that had given non-alignment its meaning ended with it. Sukarno didn't lose to Washington or Moscow. Tito didn't lose to Stalin's ghost. They lost to the same thing every nation eventually faces when its power is borrowed. The lenders went home. But before Sukarno could play two superpowers against each other, he had to survive the empire that didn't want to leave. In 1946 and 1947, in the villages of South Sulawesi, a Dutch officer named Raymond Westerling carried out a campaign the Netherlands would spend the next 50 years refusing to call what it was. No trial, no battlefield. Just lists of names and men dragged in front of their neighbors and shot. The official Dutch death toll was around 4,000. Indonesian historians put the real number many times higher. Westerling was never prosecuted. He died in his bed in the Netherlands in 1987, a free man. How a single Dutch captain was given the authority to execute civilians at that scale and why his own government quietly protected him for the rest of his life, starts here.